Welcome to Club Soda's Mindful Drinking Festival. We're online, global, and as always, absolutely free. Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm one of the co-founders of Club Soda.
And I'm Laura, the other co-founder of Club Soda. We help you change your drinking in ways that help you live well. So whether you're looking to cut down, stop for a bit, or quit, you can find what you need from podcasts and books and courses on joinclubsoda.com. This festival, we've brought you an amazing lineup from over 100 people from across the world.
And our programme this time really is global.
Every day starts down under with me, Sarah. As well as organising the festival in Australia, I spend my time looking for alcohol-free alternatives and tips for people who choose not to drink, but who still want to live a social, fun and adventurous life.
And I'll be wrapping up each day here in the States. I'm Amanda, your US festival host and coordinator, and I'm also a mindset coach who helps women change their relationship with alcohol so that they can start living their most authentic life.
Each day with a rolling programme of inspirational panels, conversations, social events, and opportunities to discover new low and low alcohol drinks.
So whether you want inspiration to change your drinking,
Or to connect with other people,
or you want to discover and enjoy a new low and no alcohol drink,
The Mindful Drinking Festival is for you.
cheers!
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 cheers.
Cheers. Hello,
Cheers.
everyone.
Oh, I've actually got
Yes.
a cup of sleepy tea.
I got a cheers there. Yeah. Oh, wait, there's the camera. Hi. Well, hello and welcome to welcome to Queer Happy Hour USA. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm not still on mute, right?
No, yeah, we can hear you.
Well, before I introduce our amazing panelists who we're going to have a conversation with, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Laura Silverman. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder of the Sobriety Collective and Booze Free in DC and co-founder of Zero Proof Nation, along with Chris Marshall of Sands Bar. So I'm all things booze free. I've been a booze free babe for the past 13 years. And for those of you who don't know, I am the B in LGBTQIA. So if you didn't know, now you know. I'm super excited to be here with all of you, and I'm honored to introduce Laura Willoughby and Lazarus Letcher. So I'm just going to go into your bios, and then we're going to start chatting, okay? Laura Willoughby, as many of you know, is one of the co-founders of Club Soda.
And that terrible video. That was at the beginning.
She's actually a member of the most excellent order of the British Empire. I had to Google what MBE meant, which is awesome. But Club Soda, as you probably all know by now, is a social startup helping people change their drinking that has been supported by many a social investor. Previously, she was CEO of Move Your Money, the National Campaign for the Arts, and the Food Chain, a London-based HIV charity. From 98 to 2010, she was an elected member in local government, did many things around public health, regeneration, and community engagement. And she created Queers Without Beers in the UK when she set up Club Soda with her co-founders. It's a bi-run company and partners with LGBTQIA orgs in the UK.
Even sadder than that, Laura, that my co-founders of my first sober dates when we were exploring polyamory, they've just never been able to escape from me. I do feel sorry for them. If anybody would like to come and rescue them, they've been stuck with me now. Don't ever go on a date with me. That's the answer.
Well, I'm over here in the US, but maybe someday. Next, we have Lazarus Letcher. Laz is a PhD student and instructor at the University of New Mexico on unceded Tiwa Pueblo land in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Laz's art activism and academic work focuses on Black liberation and Indigenous solidarity, trans history, and the white supremacist roots of addiction and recovery. Laz is a touring musician and works at Self-Serve Sexuality Resource Center. They have written for Autostraddle, The Tempest, and, in their words, boring academic journals. Laz's work on the Black trans experience and recovery can be found on their website, lazarusletcher.com, and copious pictures of their dogs can be found on their Instagram, which you will see floating around below. Okay, so now that we've all had our fancy bios written and said, welcome, what does being queer mean to you? Popcorn style, who wants to go first? Anybody?
Shall I go first? Because I think it's a really interesting term. It's really interesting because Club Soda as a whole isn't a queer organisation. We're not only aimed at queer people. And so when I set up Queers Like Beers, lots of people came in going, "You can't use the word queer," which because it has so many negative connotations. I had to explain that we're queer and we've reclaimed that word and it is okay now, and it's used to describe things that don't fit in a box, because it's not, no one's necessarily 100% straight, 100% gay, or any of those things. We need to have new words to ascribe it. And actually, the really interesting thing for me is I use the word mindful drinker in the same way. I'm an alcohol-free mindful drinker. Other people might be moderating mindful drinkers. Some people might be have never drunk before mindful drinkers. But we've all got intersections of things that we have in common as non-drinkers. It might be, crap service at a bar, or wanting something interesting to drink, or peer pressure, or any of those things. Okay. But sometimes we need some broader terms to be able to umbrella a whole load of different behaviours in. And as time has gone on, queer means so it is actually a really important identity for me as somebody who didn't fit neatly in a box. When I first came out as bisexual, it's actually quite difficult to come out as bisexual back in like the late 90s anyway. Sometimes I sleep with women and sometimes I sleep with men, and to be honest, I don't really care about somebody's gender, and it all gets a very complicated discussion and people don't know how to deal with it. So queer is a really useful term and is really powerful for me.
Yeah, that's so great. What about you, Laz? What does the word queer mean to you, and how has it informed your identity?
Yeah, I love that question. For me, I love just like the potential of queer and how it's an umbrella term for all the like not so neat identities that a lot of us have. I know where I live that there are a lot of genders and sexualities outside and beyond the binary that we've lost the language for. And I know my ancestors had that. And for me, queer feels about as close as I can get to those lost terms and identities. And I do love that, like, it used to be used as an insult against us. And now I'm like, yeah, no, I am queer. Like, thank you for seeing me. It kind of takes the staying power out of it, I think, for me, and a little bit of the sting. And as someone, I've transitioned and I've identified as a lot of things, but I've always been queer. That's been kind of the thread that's gone throughout my life. So yeah, I just love its umbrella that we can all kind of nestle under in the storm of the heteropatriarchy.
Yes, indeed. And it's always great to reclaim a word, just like, obviously we're talking about queer, but drinking, we think drinking and it's really easy to think alcohol, but people like all of us, and especially I'm going to give it up to you, Laura, mindful drinking doesn't necessarily have to mean, drinking alcohol mindfully, as we've all talked about. But we have an interesting question in the chat, and I just want to ask it right now. Laura, how has Queers Without Beers evolved?
Slowly and unsteadily is the real truth. So we started it because, very early on, we reached out to London Friend, which is an organisation we like. They were running a campaign over January within their organisation to encourage, they do lots of addiction work in the LGBT community in London, but very hardcore face-to-face work. Where Club Soda was sitting in the space at the time I always describe us a bit like Weight Watchers, but with booze, so supporting people to do a self-guided journey. There actually isn't anything like that in the queer space. So we provided some resources for them to do a January campaign around not drinking in the queer community. And we provided emails and great articles. And we talked about our journeys. And then we decided to do a party at the end of it. And absolutely tons of people turned up, and we thought, oh, wow, it'd be really sad not to do this again. And because we now know lots of alcohol-free drinks producers, we started to get donations and thought, well, why don't we just do our own bar? We found a queer-run cafe that would let us open there in the evening. And suddenly it changed it from being, so it's not a round table meeting or anything like that. We are actually a pop-up bar that people come to. And And it was great. It was mixed generations, which is what I like most about queer venues, which is why probably I didn't go to so many in London. Outside of London, you get a lot more mixed genders and mix of ages. And that's what started to happen at Queers Without Beers. We had to turf the Muslim LGBT group out at the last ones out the door because, they found a space that they enjoyed. And we're now at a point where we actually we've partnered with organisations in both Manchester and Bristol to try and do them there. But we're now exceeding the resources and time that we have. And so we're now looking about turning it into a charity, which I was thinking we could turn into an international charity. And we could look at having chapters around the world and try and create something that feels a bit global to bring the queer community together, which in some respects is there's still space in the queer sobriety for all sorts of different types of approaches that aren't quite there yet. So it'd be really cool.
That's
potted history.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That's really awesome. I actually had a statistic that I wrote down. It's from 2016 from Hazelden Betty Ford. So I'm sure it's already a little out of date if it's, from 2016, but it leads into the next question that we have. So per Hazelden Betty Ford, which if any of you viewers don't know is one of the prominent and oldest addiction treatment organizations in the United States, the statistic says that treatment-seeking LGBTQIA individuals also display significantly higher rates of mental illness than do non-LGBTQ individuals, and transgender men and women are more than twice as likely to have a diagnosis of a mental illness as cisgender men or women. And with that in mind, it's the perfect segue into this question from our audience here. But what special considerations are there for the LGBTQ plus community regarding addictive drinking? And Laz, I actually wanted to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always bring up when I'm doing talks about this is like, how many LGBTQ brick and mortar buildings do you know that aren't bars? And most people can't think of many in their communities. So bars have been a central part of the LGBTQ journey. And I think a lot of that is rooted in shame. And like, we can only come together when we were inebriated, but and we also needed community. So trying to walk that line. And one of the things I also always bring up, like, I appreciate that trans folks were in that statistic. And as someone that's non-binary, it was pretty much impossible for me to go to an inpatient rehab facility when I could have really benefited from that. A lot of centers will say they're LGBT friendly and think that the T is silent. I would call them up, 1 week sober with the shakes, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They didn't know how housing or rooming would work for me. So the trans community is often left out of these discussions with addiction and recovery, especially recovery. So yeah, that's just something I always want to highlight and folks I know that are non-binary that went into treatment would have to go stealth, which means not disclosing their trans identity. They weren't allowed to have the hormone replacement therapy that they needed and ended up getting sicker in recovery than getting better. So that's what I'm always fighting for, is like more trans representation in sobriety and especially like in addiction recovery, because we really need it.
Yeah. And thank you so much for making the T not silent.
But it's also, I think, definitely the case in the UK, which is, alcohol sits in a really strange place. It tends to get boxed off into services on its own. And then if you present yourself with mental health issues as well, you find that the mental health services won't help you because you've got problems with alcohol, and the alcohol services won't help you because until you've sorted out some of your issues with mental health. And people fall through the cracks. In our healthcare system, where there are, where you can access free healthcare in this space, and so and that's often been an issue, particularly for men. And then if you add into the LGBTQ community into that, where mental health issues are quite prevalent and issues around identity, and drinking is linked to how you feel about your identity, because we probably started drinking quite young because we felt like the stranger and at the party, and so it's easier to drink when you're the stranger at the party. So it becomes this sort of boiling pot of issues around identity and feeling excluded. That means that you drink to begin with, then you don't deal with your mental health issues and the emotions. And then even when you change your drinking, you've still got those issues underneath to still deal with. So I always say that, giving up drinking is like living your life in high definition, and you've now got to feel and deal with all these emotions that you've stuffed away for a very long time. And then you need support from a community that understands what those issues are, and not just any old community, because people need to understand that you may have felt awkward about sex for a long time, or like for me, I'm not sure about you, Laura, so I felt like I was a shit lesbian, basically, because I was attracted to two daughters. Oh God, I'm such a shit lesbian. When I stood for Parliament back in 2002, there was an article for Diva magazine, and they even said to me, "Are you sure you're definitely 100% lesbian, aren't you? Because otherwise we can't put you in this article." And I was like, what the fuck, what's 100% lesbian? I don't understand. And, things progress so much. I worked for Stonewall in the UK back in 1999, 2000, and I was told not to tell anybody I was bisexual when I was working for them, because the fight at that time was about equal age consent and being born gay, and everything we lynched on that being born gay argument, which means that if you think you're bisexual, that means you might not be, and they didn't even want that complication in there. So you can really see how, I feel even more for the trans community, which feels like it's come last in this equality fight, that some of those things are still really, really hard and difficult, and still fighting really hard. And so, there's a whole generational thing going on here as well. So many issues.
That is such an interesting point, and it speaks so much to the fact that there's so many different layers to personal evolutions and questions about the evolution of our identities, both sexual orientation identity and gender identity expression. And so I would love to talk a little bit about evolutions, sobriety and mindful drinking, and then, gender and sexuality. Those are both personal evolutions, and for our population, very closely intertwined. So what is the relationship between, being a sober person or a booze-free person and a queer person been like for you? And I'm going to start with you, Laz. No pressure.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, I started drinking around when I started realizing, like, this body is betraying me. I don't know what these boobs are. Like, they found the wrong body, and like, oh no, I'm definitely gay and I live in rural Indiana and I'm already Black. Isn't this enough? And so drinking for me was one of the only ways I could like kind of separate myself from my body that didn't feel like my own. And also for me was like a rare way for me to express my masculinity. Like I really prided myself in being able to drink all these farm boys under the table, which I definitely picked up from an Indiana Jones movie when I was a kid. Like there was a woman that could like outdrink the men, and then she were one of the guys, and I was like, that's my in. And for me, like I came out as trans, and like when I got top surgery, I woke up and like asked for whiskey right away. Like I kind of thought that, you know, my physical transition would fix all of my mental health issues. Like was starting to realize that I had some substance issues, but still wasn't quite there. Cause I love what you said about like high definition. Like I definitely still was not able to like address the mental and addictive behaviors that I had. And since I've gotten sober 2.5 years ago, I'm way more comfortable in my skin than I ever was. Like any step of my transition pales in comparison to me getting sober and feeling comfortable with myself and recognizing like, oh, I still had so much internalized transphobia, homophobia, just like this deeply embedded shame that I needed to get sober to kind of uncover. And for me, like being sober is an important part of my identity, like right up there with being Black, being trans. Like none of these are separable from me, and they deeply are intertwined, I think, historically and for me in the present. But yeah.
That's beautiful.
I mean, none of this is easy, is it? I mean, there's a comment in there about where does shame contribute? And of course, you can feel shame about your sexuality, and then you can feel shame about your drinking, and they can go in this horrible circle that you never are able to break out of, because being able to see what life could possibly be like is really difficult, and even more difficult when you've got a hangover and no energy. And I guess, I can't pinpoint that my drinking's necessarily to do with sexuality. I come from a small town in Somerset, and I had a dad who, drank to excess, and that killed him. And so I'm definitely my father's daughter. So that was already there. I'm then of a generation, so like I'm 46 now. Let's work that out then. And I'm in the UK. I'm what they call the Ladette generation, which is that generation that was like, right, equality is all about drinking as hard as the men. And I was able to just drink as much as anybody else. And so for me, that was a sign of equality. And then actually in the UK in particular, there's a lot of gendered stuff that's changed. So, it became no longer acceptable for a man to go out in the evening to the pub and leave the wife at home looking after the children when both are working, and co-parenting came in. So that's when wine got cheaper in the supermarket, and so people started drinking wine at home together. So there are some real big patterns in the shape of how equalities works, along with how women's drinking has gone up in particular, and how now my age group are all going, oh, look, we can eat loads of kale and go to the gym, but we're really undoing all that hard work if we're still smashing a bottle of wine into our mouths every night. So that identity as a woman alone and that sort of pressure is part of it. And then being a queer woman in politics, without children, and able to carry on living a life that I, turning up at home at 1 a.m, because I had no responsibilities at home, not even a cat. I mean, what sort of shit lesbian was I? I mean, come on. I don't know. I'm such a failure. Anyway, but not having any of those things that normally, I guess, pin people to societal norms, then also changes that. And then being in a job, and as somebody who's an activist by nature, being in a job that I absolutely hated, that I felt that I wasn't proud to tell people about, that then just was the last straw and just totally destroyed my self-esteem. And so I got to the point when I drinking became like an extreme sport, just to see how I was going to get myself out of this. And then, like we all do, we do that thing which is, so you must have felt that, Lazarus, around, everything would be better if I can change at A or B. And I was thinking, maybe I can get out of this shit job if I give up drinking. But actually I needed to get out of the job in order to give up drinking. It was the other way around. So there's no order to these things. You have to take whichever step you feel you can at the time. And the issues that mean that we drink a lot or drink to excess are sort of like an onion and unpeeling. And I guess what I would say sobriety has given me is the confidence to be myself, and the confidence, not that I was ever totally unconfident. I'm politically involved in Liberal Democrats in the UK, which is, probably one of the queerest parties there is. But, and so I was very confident in some ways, but now I guess my values and how I'm living my life are far more aligned. And that makes me the confident person I am. I can live my values. I can be a nice person, not a grumpy old fart because I'm hungover. I can have lovely little micro interactions with people every day. These are things that energize me. I just, before I came on, I thought, I've got half an hour. I'm going to write a complaint letter to the council, which I did. Actually, I'm such a big pain in the ass now I'm sober, really.
Sounds like a good pain in the ass. I want to take a stab at that question too. I think my old therapist would be so proud of me right now, because I've always known that I was bi. In elementary school, I had crushes on boys and girls, and I always thought it would be easier to just be one or the other. Like, couldn't I just be totally straight, or couldn't I just be totally gay? Because it didn't make sense for me to like both. And I didn't really at the time have a lot of bisexual role models. And I feel like only recently have there been more and more bisexual prominent people who have the B of LGBTQ, in the limelight. But I was a binge drinker, and I drank for, a multitude of reasons. But one of them was definitely my own mental health issues. And it was just easier to numb out and not feel. And, of course, I didn't realize I was self-medicating at the time. But even so, like, I always felt shame about my sexuality. And it's like, honestly, not a big deal. But I have, you mentioned it before. And it just it totally rang that bell for me. I have, even now at 37, I still have internalized biphobia. I still have internalized homophobia. And, the newer generations now are just so open and free, and it's really inspiring. But I think I'm still sort of on the tail end of the generation that it took more to, quote unquote, come out. It was more of a process, and people don't have to come out as straight. So why do they have to come out as gay or queer or anything, But I think, anyway, the fact that I am here with the two of you, if anyone who's watching can relate to the fact that, queer identity is an evolving process, just like, a sober identity or a non-drinker identity. And even if I've always known it, I just haven't always been able to be open and express it. And I've been sober for 13 years. So it's only been recently that I've just been like, what the heck? Like, why not? If I can help anyone and myself. So I wanted to share, normally the moderators don't really go too deeply into their stories, but I think it's important to, we see so many out and proud and amazing activists like the two of you in queer spaces. And I also haven't seen, I wanted to couch it with an and instead of a but I haven't seen a lot of people who are, sort of at the beginning of their process talk about it. And so I think that could be a really unique perspective for someone.
Can I ask you a question, Laura?
Please.
So, now, I mean, one of the things, because, being queer is all about who you have relationships with, ultimately, isn't it? It's a relationship type status. And so do you think that now that you're sober, that it's not just about your identity as a queer person, but it's knowing what you want from a relationship that you can be far more confident about? Because by understanding who you are, you can then often, because we feel shame about our sexuality and shame about our drinking, we're just happy to take anyone who will love us.
Yeah.
And actually that's not acceptable either. And I think by being able to be sober and therefore clearing your own identity, we all might be able to get relationships that we all deserve as well, and that we want and that nurture us. And that's another great thing that's come from me from changing drinking, but we often don't ever talk about it in those terms. I don't know if that's
that's a phenomenal point. And for me, I've actually been single for a very long time, and I think in terms of relationships, and I would definitely love to hear, each of your take on it, but I know that I am my best self with someone else when I am, my best self on my own. And I'm self-partnered. I'm dating myself. It's really going well, I have to say. No, but I like being single. Of course, I want, to find love with someone. But I could have settled at any point in my journey, and I didn't want to. And I don't think anyone should, but I know that we've all been there, and I have settled before. I just didn't want to settle with any sort of, finality to it. But, that leads me to community, because here we're in a community together, a global one. And we know that, the queer community and the sober community, they're both really, really strong. But only recently has there been that like intertwining of both. So how have each of, well, I know a little bit more about you, Laura, but how have you each built community to support your, you know, dual identities? And I know I keep starting with you, Laz, but I'm not going to mess with the good things. So I'm going to start with you.
No, I love order. This is fine with me. Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, like I mentioned, I didn't really have any queer trans community growing up in the Midwest in small, very white towns. And now that I'm in Albuquerque, it's been just like amazing to have any queer community. And I got lucky. I work at a feminist sex toy shop, like you do. And we started having recovery meetings there because every LGBT recovery meeting was in a church basement. And I'm someone that tried to pray the gay away, so I wasn't very comfortable in like going into a church basement again to try to change something about myself.
Yeah.
So it's been really lovely, like, you know, having sober meetings behind a wall of dildos, you know, like I felt more comfortable there. And I also work at my university's LGBT center, and they've let me do some sober programming just for folks who too were like curious about like, you know, when I first got sober, I remember just like sitting in my room and staring at the wall at 5 p.m. And I was like, I'm a monk now. This is what I do. I chose the sober lifestyle. Woe is me. I'm no longer allowed to have fun, which is not the case. So like we've been having workshops about like how to just do basic socializing sober, because I honestly didn't know how to do that when I got sober. I was like, I don't know what to do besides like go to a bar. I don't know what to do when I bump into someone and I'm like, oh, let's catch up and grab a beer. I'm like, what is that interaction? And another thing too is I've found intergenerational queer and trans community in sobriety, which I've never had before. And it's been like absolutely incredible to like have more connection with my elders and like learn about the struggles that like made my life a little easier. And we just wrapped up yesterday, but I work at a summer camp for queer and trans kids. It's a little music rock camp for 12 to 17-year-olds. And it's amazing working with queer and trans youth, which I never could have done when I was actively drinking, like being on call for, you know, a 13-year-old trans boy having a panic attack at the crack of dawn. And I had to explain to them, they're like, so why didn't you come out when you were in elementary school like we did? I was like, I didn't have words. Like, I didn't know people like me existed. And they could not wrap their minds around it. And at first I was like, this is so like, woe is me, I didn't have this, but it's just like, wait, no, this is incredible. Like, you can't even imagine what my life was like. And like, you're thriving. Like, yeah. So for me, I think one of the biggest gems of sobriety has been that like intergenerational queer connection. Like, I would not change it for the world.
That's so wonderful. What about you, Laura?
I think, I mean, we do a lot of behavior change research into changing drinking in club soda. And we focus on all of the positive behavior change techniques and then the negative ones. So I don't go around telling people how bad alcohol is for you, because generally by the time anyone wants to come and join club soda, we've worked that bit out.
Yeah.
No shit, Sherlock, right? So we look at all the positive things. So, you know, what is it the life that you want to lead, and how can community support you by sharing advice? Exactly what you said, Laz, around understanding how to socialize sober, and know that the awkwardness you might feel in month 1 at socializing sober might go by month 6 or 7, the more you practice doing it, actually. So you need to be able to know those things, which aren't very easily, you know, given in a book or in a lecture or any of those things. And the most important thing that actually has just come up, what Lazarus has said, and what I believe, is that positive role modelling is where it's at. There are members of Club Soda who came in thinking that they were just wanting to look to moderate. And they were so jealous of the people who seemed to be living a really happy life alcohol-free, who were like 6 months and a year ahead of them, that they wanted a big bit of the piece of that action. And I think there's a question there that says, how do you avoid feeling deprivation of when you're going sober? And I would say there are 2 things. One is you need to look at the life that people who are ahead of you in the journey are leading. And only do that if you can find spaces to meet other people, either online or in the real world, in order to have that conversation and to understand that the sky hasn't fallen in, they haven't lost all their friends, they're beginning to date again. They have found that we all find some great, amazing, like I call getting sober like 100 little epiphanies. I have learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about my emotions. I've learned so much about how to be a better person in the world, that they're things that I no longer want to give up by having a drink. It's just, I just don't want to drink. That's where I'm at. But the other thing is that, but you begin to see how others are living a life that you may want. And at the bottom of all of this about changing your drinking, it's not about what am I taking away, what can't I have anymore because it's bad for me. It's about what is the life that I want to lead going forward. You know, what was the image you have of yourself? I feel like I'm the person I was when I first moved to London and got elected when I was 23 onto the council, right? I feel like that person again, the person who's got that energy to fight, that person who's got the energy to stand up and make my voice be heard, but help other people make their voice be heard, that can you know, think about the issues of the day rather than push the newspaper aside and think it's too difficult to think about. I need it another day, and to engage in the issues. And for me, that's the gift. That's the life that I want to lead. And so maybe not. If anyone's struggling right now, don't focus on what you're giving up. Focus on what it is that you want, and really decide: does alcohol fit into that at all? Does alcohol help you or hinder you to get into that point? Because if it's going to hinder you, then you've got this amazing life ahead of you that you want to lead. So let's go for it, guys.
Amen. Right. And you totally read my mind, because that was going to be sort of one of my closing questions.
Oh, shit.
No, I mean, like, advice for someone struggling with either, you know, their sexuality or their gender identity or their drinking habits. But, you know, I definitely want to touch on that, but that's also intertwined with another of my questions, which is, let me look here. What are some of your favorite resources for queer folks who don't drink, besides Queers Without Beers? But for those who aren't familiar with that, definitely, you know, maybe someone joined late. So Laura, can you talk a little bit more about Queers Without Beers? And then when we go to you, Laz, I know you do a lot with the Tempest, correct? Or Temper or Tempest or both. So we'll do Laura first this time.
I mean, we've got a really great network of LGBT plus organisations in the UK, and all of them have some form of support around addiction. So you should definitely reach out to those groups, because they've got such a history and experience, and they may also be able to help with some of the other issues to support you around mental health and maybe issues around chemsex and all of those things as well. They are uniquely positioned and amazing organisations. Queers Without Beers is just a teeny thing at the moment, but we do have a Facebook group, and we're planning to bring some more things online. We now have to start thinking more seriously about what we are and what we're trying to achieve, and diversity and all of those things as well. So actually, I'm interested in what people think that they want from us, and where we provide something that's unique. I don't want to do the same work as the other organisations. I want to create that social space. But more importantly than that, and I was having this discussion because we're going to go in for a funding bid for some research in this area, which is that, you know, I'm not a big advocate of alcohol-free only spaces generally, partly because things need to be financially stable to be able to keep places going. But I'm a big advocate of venues having more range and more choice. And that's why we have clubsodaguide.com, which is our way of getting pubs and bars to change what they stock. And I have to say, the last 2.5 years in the UK has been amazing for venues changing what it is that they serve. It's now actually, you know, they've all got a decent alcohol-free beer. They're all beginning to put kombucha on tap and behind the bar. There's an amazing shift here in the UK. But queer venues, what's left of them, are very focused around alcohol or tap water. Those are great choices. And I want to make sure that we can create prides that have good range of drinks at the bar. So we'd started to do some work with prides this year around all the regional prides that for me, that's the ultimate inequality, having social spaces where everybody feels welcome, whether you're drinking or not, that no one feels out of place. And so there shouldn't be a pride where there isn't a good alcohol-free bar. There shouldn't be, or options, there shouldn't be an alcohol-free venue that doesn't have good options for everybody and makes everybody feel welcome, whatever it is that they order. And for me, that's where we begin to reopen up our social spaces, because of course, I think queer venues have become very, small and insular because in the UK at least it's possible to go to a pub and at most pubs and snog your partner anyway. So now we need to create spaces that feel right for the queer community and feel inclusive for the queer community.
Snog. That's fun. I love that word. Laz, what are some of your favorite resources? I'm sure you probably created them. So.
Yeah, so I work for the Tempest Sobriety School. I run one of the BIPOC peer support calls, and they also have LGBTQIA support calls, and the Temper, which is like a part of it, has incredible resources for like, I loved what Laura was saying about like role models, like people you can follow on Instagram that are out and queer and sober, and people who are ahead on the journey, and you're like, why is their life so amazing? It's like, no hangovers, does wonders. Like the internet has been a huge place for me. And then also like trying to cultivate spaces. Like I work a lot with trans youth, and I'm like, great, let's find an LGBTQ place that we can host this event. And it's like, great, none of you can come in here because you're under 21. So I do love creating spaces that can be all ages, especially for queer and trans youth, because I had nowhere to go until I was 21. But Albuquerque is also making that shift. We have some kombucha on tap, and it was really surreal to be like back in a bar stool with a fancy glass. I was like, oh my, or even just
kombucha in champagne bottles. Look at that.
Ooh,
we'll bring into that because we're going to talk about that next. We're going to talk in our last like 3 minutes about beverages.
Real kombucha.
So you're sitting on a bar stool having kombucha in a fancy glass.
Yeah, and just like, oh, I'm allowed to have this. Like I'm allowed to have a life. And I've gotten past my monk phase of early sobriety and realized like, oh, I'm allowed to have pleasure. I'm allowed to have joy. I don't need to suffer in sobriety. And just I start and end every day with a gratitude list. And almost everything that's on my gratitude list is a direct result of me getting sober. So that always helps me remember how I got here and keeps me here as well. But I do love that society as a whole seems to be recognizing like, oh, not everyone's drinking and we still want their money. How do we get it? I hate capitalism, but I like when I'm included and it's like plots.
Especially if it involves dessert.
Ooh,
oh my God.
See?
Toronto is waiting for me after this. That's my prize. And we have a comment, and we have about 3 minutes left, everyone. So if you have any last minute questions or comments, drop them in the chat. But you know that you can always reach out to any of us to continue the conversation. Someone mentioned book readings at queer bookstores. Absolutely. When we can go back to places. I know.
I remember places.
I remember them vaguely. But yeah, capitalism, including us, all these amazing low and no ABV beverages that this festival is celebrating. So let's talk about just a few of our favorite beverages before we head out, to give who's here a positive resource, and that obviously your social life does not have to end when you stop drinking alcohol. I don't know if this is part of the festival or not, but I love Well-Being Brewing.
They were on the American tasting yesterday. So yeah.
Oh, were they? Awesome. I think they're sold out of this, which is, sad face, but I'm drinking that now. And I have just a massive, I don't know if you guys can see my bar cart with my electric guitar in the background. Lots of Lyres, an Element Shrub, and some other fun stuff. But
if you go back and watch the videos from earlier today, you'll see the queer breakfast that was on in the UK, which had an amazing panel on it, as well as somebody from a couple of people from Australia. But there is a couple called Joelle and Sarah who live in Wales, and they are the only queer alcohol-free brewers that I know. So we need to get Drop Bear beer. Their beer is also amazing, and they're also like, we've adopted them in Club Soda because
what is the name of their brewing company?
Drop Bear Beer. So DRO beer. But go back and have a look. If any of you haven't seen it, do have a look at the queer breakfast this morning. It was really, really fascinating, and it was a great panel. And so they're the queer approved beer. That's basically it. And so somehow we have to get them into America so that they can supply you guys as well. So and I think they're going to do a tie-up with a well-known trans brewer in the UK who's been doing a lot of work on that to do a beer as well. So I'm very excited by these tie-ups.
Good, yeah. Laz, what are a couple of your favorite things to sip now that you are booze-free?
I'm just on the bubbly water train. Like, I've saved so much money in sobriety, and about half of it has gone like directly to LaCroix. Yeah, I'm just on that fizzy water life.
I love that fizzy water life. That is so awesome. So I am just so honored to have shared this conversation with the two of you. I look up to you so much, both of you. And if Tani is watching, Tani, I love you. Tani Lara is my bi babe role model. So without her, I don't think I could have really started to embrace my own identity as a queer booze-free babe. So thank you both for joining us, and thank you everyone wherever you are in the world right now. We are with you, and you are never alone. And find something tasty to drink.